Just in time.
This evening, we have a gentleman that has lived in Winthrop for many years. He's been a school teacher for 47 years. And he taught at the Winthrop High School and he taught history. And my children loved him, so. He's gonna talk about several things with the Indigenous people
Yeah,
tonight and trails that they had and so forth. And we have a book up there that Dave wrote, along with several others that he's written too. So please welcome him.
it's always fun to speak someplace close to home, so we just get in the car and drive home, and get home in 5 minutes rather than get up. The last time I spoke, I was up in Emden. Yeah, that's all to get around, to get over there. I mean, it's not so far away, it's just, anyway. Much bigger turnout here than there was in Emden, I'll tell you. Anyway, you probably wonder where I got this good looking sweatshirt. I mean, well, I got right over here at the gift store. And this is a bicentennial sweatshirt that was published. That's our date of incorporation as a town. 23rd town in the state of Maine, by the way. And the first town not on navigable water, but a backcountry town, which meant everything had to come through Hollowell, which explains why we still don't like them very well. That included not only our stuff from the boats, but also the fish they cut off on us down in Gardner. So we were probably had a chip on our shoulder with her for a while. But anyway, I'm here to talk about a system of travel through this region that predates that by thousands of years. And exactly when people started traveling by birchbark canoe, we don't know. We do know that the conditions that created the canoe environment came after the ice left, started around 20,000 years ago, and then moved out fairly quickly. And by 10,000 years ago, the region was pretty much ice-free, even though the water levels of the ocean were much lower than they are today, probably 400 feet. So stand on Mount Cadillac and look out and imagine 400 feet less water in depth. And you've got some idea how much would be out there as far as terrain. And people do, I know, might have it, people that drag claws through there and have picked up horse teeth, horse bones, not the kind of horse you throw over the side of Stonington when the thing died plowing for you. It'd be, these are old horses, 10,000, you know, that existed. And who knows what that coastal plain must have looked like for hundreds of years. And then the ocean started to come back in with the melting of the ice caps. And the land, we did some interesting things because as the ice left, the ice had depressed the surface of the earth by many feet. And I think it's like 1 foot for every 3 feet of ice. And some places in Maine, we had up to 10,000 feet of ice. So you imagine how far down that pushed the surface of the earth. And when the ice left, it didn't just pop up. It took a while for it to come up rather slowly. And so by about 10,000 years ago, the coastline was emerging. The interior was starting to shape up. As the ice left, this area here was under ocean water for about almost 1,000 years. The ocean ran all the way into the interior, all the way up to Millinocket on the Penobscot, all the way to Bingham on the Kennebec. So this whole area would have been in the water for a while. Now there would have been some hills and the taller, but anywhere that's above 400 feet above sea level in Maine was above the influx of the ocean. So here we're only a couple hundred feet above sea level. So that's what explains all this blue-green marine clay people dig up when they dig up cellar holes and whatnot. That green, blue, wet clay substance that sometimes got shells in it, which indicate it was salt water. But that's all very interesting, and human beings are on the scene at some point during this time. We don't know when. We do know that at some of the interior sites, there are great dates. In Milo, my hometown, by the way, my friend Mike Brigham owned a site on the Piscataquis River, and he knew we all knew there was a lot of stuff down there. And he went over and dug a hole one day, and he called me on the phone. He said, "You got to come see the hole I dug." So I went over to my buddy's house, and we went down. He had a ladder down the hole. It was like 6 feet deep, and I mean, just a hole. It wasn't like an archaeological, sure enough archaeological pit. It was just a hole. But he got down to it. From the bottom, he'd uncovered a layer of blue-green marine clay. So that's the bottom of the thing. So that was interesting. But he pointed out that before he got to that level, he'd already gone through 6 inches of blue-green marine clay, which was a redeposit of stuff coming down the river from the melting of the Great Lakes that were born as the ice melted. And the ice and the gravel in the water plugged up the valley outlets, which created temporary lakes. There were some rather big. Shirley Bog, for example, below Moosehead, that was all one big huge wet lake in there at one time. And that may have been what let go when they flooded them out down to Milo. I don't know what it was, but there was a tremendous flood sequence over a period of, I don't know, 500-600 years, apparently, according to the depositions in the site. And what Mike discovered was that first layer of that blue-green stuff that he found had always discouraged previous archaeologists from going below it, because the assumption was, oh, that's the Presumpscot formation. It's that stuff that's below it. There's nothing, so no point in going. Well, Mike persevered and hacked through that about 6 inches with an entrenching tool. That's what he dug it out with. Anyway, he got there and he was somewhat flabbergasted when he found not only charcoal, but bone fragments and stone artifacts, chips and flakes. So, my God, that's a big deal, I mean. And with that hole that Mike dug, he changed the interior of Maine archaeology by pointing out that there are these buried sites. See, Maine's not supposed to have deeply buried sites with any organic preservation because of all the acid nature of the soil and so on and so forth. But right in Milo, and now there's other places they've gone back to reinvestigate. They found, oh yeah, there's more of this stuff. Well, the radiocarbon dates off the bottom of the site were 10,290. That's old. And the terrain wouldn't have looked anything like what we see today when people were in that spot, which is at the junction of Piscataquis and Sebec Rivers in Milo. And the ocean was right there somewhere close by. And people lived there continuously until about 400 years ago. Every archaeological sequence in Maine is in the Northeast is represented there, and artifacts are found that are made from materials that are not native to this region. For example, you find a lot of well, Mount Kineo. Where's my little box of goodies? Milo is in the area below, south and east of Mount Kineo, and the result was, as the ice went over Kineo, it plucked that steep south face of Mount Kineo. Have you ever saw it from Rockwood? That's all been picked away, and they left it on the farm fields of Piscataquis County, unfortunately. But this is the kind of stuff that you find all over the place. And if you look at that carefully, you can see that it's got an edge that was pecked and sharpened a little bit. Here's another knife, sort of a knife. You can see this is also the same kind of material, but this wasn't, they didn't go to Mount Kineo to get this. They just picked it out of the river because that's where it was. And the surface here, you see a nice smooth a water-worn cortex, they call that. That's where they just lay it out in the water for a long time and it got polished down. And then somebody picked the thing up and whacked a big flake off it and sharpened it to do something with, whether it was to cut a fish up or who knows what. But there is a technique that any organic material that was cut with this would have material jammed into the pores of the stone that could be cooked out and analyzed and dated. So the problem with it is it's really expensive. It's only done in a couple of places and it's not perfect yet. So it's got promise, but just imagine going back to archaeological collections that have been around for 100 years or more and doing that deal with the analysis and say, oh, this was used to kill a buffalo, 9,000 years ago and wherever. Anyway, this is the kind of stuff you find. And a lot of people, these aren't great artifacts, but they're the kind of things that you find. They don't find great ones because people pick them up and take them. Here's another flake. They say, well, it's just a flake. It is, but it's got this little interesting thing knocked out of it. You ever see a hunting knife with a kind of a hook to help you disembowel some critter? Well, that could be what that is. Pretty sharp, but you can pass that around. None of these things are got any great value to them. Here's a stone. You say, well, now that's not Mount Kineo felsite. That looks like granite. Yeah, it is, but it's been water tossed around and rounded. But if you notice the ends of it on both sides, they're pecked. It was used to break something, maybe to produce a flake off a bigger piece of felsite, or maybe to break acorns out. Who knows what? I don't know what it was, but you can feel it, and you can see it on both ends. So sometimes you see something, you go, "Oh, geez, I know what that is." Well, this was found on Big Island in Veretical, and it represents a type of people that are found mostly in the Ohio Valley, the Hopewell people, the mound builders. They had a presence, not necessarily in Maine, but in New Brunswick, this Monk's Mound, which the Indians that are living there now just know that that's a place where the old Indians always used to go to dance. So that's been passed down for a long, long time. So they've also excavated around there. They found some Hopewell material that includes both the types of stuff they made their clay pipes, their steatite pipes, soapstones pipe, beautiful pipes, as well as other things. But here's a piece of material that's from out there somewhere, and it's not native to here, but it was found on an island in Danabesco. Well, how did it get here? Well, it probably got here by canoe. Here's another flake. I don't know if it was anything except a flake, but if you broke that off and you were needing a knife, you got one right there. You can scrape with that. You can look at that. You can do some work with that if you had to. Here's another flake of a different kind of material, but once again, I don't know if it's an artifact or not, except it was made by a human being. They don't occur like that by accident. And here's another one. This is a several thousand-year-old projectile point. This was found by a student of mine up on Mount Bigelow. It's about a 5,000-year-old piece of basalt.
Put it up
And
here,
it's a type of
Dave, and the people. can-
material that you find on the coast. It's a volcanic type of thing. Very nice for weapons and tools. But the point I'm making is that in the Great Lakes area, in New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, New York, Maryland, as far as south of Maryland, you find material made from Mount Kineo felsite. In other words, there was some sort of a network that was passing that stuff around. When I was in graduate school, I did a project where I looked at the collections of artifacts on the Penobscot River between Mount Sunken Lake and Norway Bluff that produced a lot of this beautiful Munsungan chert that's found a lot of Paleo-Indian collections and other collections too. And the chert itself, depending on where it comes from the outcrop, it can be kind of like red, it can be red and green, it can be green, it can be this beautiful kind of translucent Coke model, they call it. It looks like a Coke model. It's beautiful. Anyway, and what I was interested in was, is there any difference in the quality or the beauty of the material the farther you get away from the source of it? Well, Penobscot River is quite long, and there's quite a lot of stuff that's been plucked off the banks and out of people's gardens over the course of the years. And guess what? Down at Blue Hill, they've got over 3,000 pieces of Monsungan chert and collections down there. And the 90% of it is this beautiful white and red and green, what they call Christmas tree chert. In other words, it's a high quality stuff. Well, doesn't that seem to indicate there was a trade going on for that sort of beautiful material? And you wouldn't trade necessarily for perfect art pieces of already made tools. You'd probably trade for the big blanks, the big flakes that were broken off that you could then take to where you wanted to do stuff better. Well, canoes were probably important in transporting this stuff. We do know that people came here fully skilled in travel and transport in a remote windless region. We know that they would have already understood all the properties of birch bark. I mean, I can't imagine one person coming into a valley and seeing somebody, God damn, this is birch bark, man. we could make a canoe on it. I mean, they do all that stuff. They probably made birch bark canoes elsewhere. They did make it in Alaska, in the North Canadian polar region. You ever see those kinds of, they're weird looking canoes, aren't they? That rather than come up at the ends, they go down like that. And probably cold water, sharp waves, makes it a little profile. I don't know what it would be, but they made them. They made them in Siberia. Huge ones. Towed upriver by horses along the banks. The guys holding the things off with poles and stuff. So birch bark was known as a good material for everything from boats to, you can boil water in a birch bark bucket. I'm told, I haven't done it myself. But anyway, the canoes kind of fascinated me as a boy growing up because number one, the man next door made them. And he was the grandfather of my best friend as a boy growing up. He was a hunter and a trapper and a guide and a warden during World War II. He worked for the Fish and Game Department and he did all kinds of things. So he was pretty fascinating to me. And we were in his shop bothering him one day, and he just got through making a nice 20-foot canoe. He says, "What do you think of that?" And I says, "Well, it's nice looking." I said, "I think I'd rather have a motorboat." He said, "You would?" And he said, "You want a motorboat?" He goes, I said, "Well, so you really go places with it." He said, "Look," he said, "I can put that canoe right in the water, and in 2 weeks I could be in Quebec City." He said, "If I wanted to." If I wanted to. And there was, well-known canoe routes all back and forth across the Northeast that people knew they existed, but they had never been a focus of anybody's attention. And Myron kind of got my attention as a kid. I probably was 10 or 11 years old when I had that encounter with him. And so I thought about it, but I didn't dwell on it. But it kept, coming back to me. I see a nice canoe, and I said, "No, Myron said I could be in Quebec City in 2 weeks if I wanted to be." And so when I started teaching here, I met all these lakes, all this wire. I was able to get a canoe. Myron made me one, 15-footer. Then he made me a 20-footer. And with those, I ransacked the rivers and lakes I made for a number of years and left paint on most of the rocks, and have never drowned, and only fallen out once, I think. But
the canoe fascinated me because number one, it was pretty cheap. I mean, it was a nice way to spend some time and get some exercise and paddle around and, you know, the animals aren't quite as afraid of you. You can paddle up pretty close to stuff and, you know, when I first get my canoe, I'm paddling along shore Lake Maranicook. And I heard this plunge like that. And I'm thinking, where the hell did that come from? It's like somebody threw a rock on that thing and boom, like that. It was a beaver. I'd never been that close to one in the water before. But they kind of let you get up close to them. They know you don't see them. And then they whack like that and get a charge out of watching you freak out. Anyway, I figured it out. But it was a lot of fun, you know, just a lot of fun. Just get out and paddle. And I wasn't thinking great thoughts about anything. I was working out, getting, you know, getting sweaty, trying to keep warm. It was cold. But I did a lot of paddling and a lot of poling. Myron took us poling when we were kids. I never saw him stand up in a canoe. You weren't supposed to stand up in a canoe, Myron. Oh, yeah. And we went up to Rockwood and he was going to go fishing and he put me and Junior in the front of his 20 and off we went up the river. And we got to that first corner where it's kind of a pretty good set of rips right there. He stood right up and grabbed that pole and started going up like that. I'm thinking, does he know what the hell he's doing? You know, we went up through so slick, just like nothing. I said, no, that is pretty fascinating right there. Because I never saw anybody do it. And I thought, if I ever get a canoe, that's what I'm going to learn to do. So that's what I did. I learned to do it. I've never had a motor. I've wanted one a couple of times, but I never bought one. And I don't like all the gas and all the oil. I get it all over me and all over your canoe and stuff. Anyway, my archaeological interests were fueled by paddling in the canoe when you realize, well, Jesus, you know, when you're paddling a canoe around these lakes, streams, and rivers and whatnot, it's like someone coming back in 5,000 years and driving a car around these roads. Would you learn a lot if you knew where people were living and could you infer what they were doing, you know, by where they lived? And think about all the things that you could learn about us. Like what you could learn about the people over in Flagstaff when you go over there low water and paddle along and go down and see the, you know, you say, well, they were farmers and they lived on the rivers, they probably worked in the woods, they, you know, all that sort of thing. That to me, it was really interesting because you could see really interesting places. They were right in the river, right where you lived. And all you had to do was find out how to find out. And the best thing I ever did in terms of my archaeology connection and what I liked was get a canoe. But second of all, I went to a Maine Archaeological Society meeting and they had a guest speaker break it open, fell site with rocks and showing us what it looked like when you made a nice projectile point. You know how many pieces you produce in making one? Like that black, the soft piece I got somewhere already, you know, hundreds. And they start out big, and then as you work down to get better and better, you know, finer and finer on the work, they get smaller. So not only can you tell what part of the guy, what his manufacturing stage was, like somewhere on places on the Pleasant River where there's big, huge boulder fields with this beautiful fell site just laying there. You find pieces cracked open, and then maybe the best flakes, just the best flakes taken. And all you find is broken stuff. You don't find it's not been worked beyond being broken. But right there is a big archaeological site where you do find stuff that's been made into something. I went up there a few years ago. It's at the junction of the Pleasant River, west and east branches, and it just had a thunder shower. Well, 10 years before, a guy had bulldozed the field to get loan to use it in a development project he had going for a housing development kind of thing. But he exposed this glacial dune field kind of a surface that every time it rains, it stuff percolates up out of the ground. And geez, I walk over, there's this stone thing sitting there. We'll look at it, and I'm pretty fascinated by the array of stuff that's now visible it's big pieces. And then as you get it further away from where somebody was sitting on that rock, probably the pieces get smaller. So you go out there and kind of search around on your hands and knees, and you find these little finishing flakes that flip off. You use a antler to do that last bit, and they fly right off. I mean, quite a ways in some cases. Anyway, geez, that real guy sat right here, and he was right-handed because you could tell where the stuff accumulated. And you say, I'm just sitting here and, picking up his debris and thinking, wow, that's pretty cool. And we also found right nearby a red ochre burial that had been exposed by the erosion. And we got the state archaeologists to look at it. We excavated about a bushel basket size of burnt charcoal. Charcoal's always burnt, isn't it? But bone, and other organic matter that had a radiocarbon date of 5,200 years. It was probably a burial of someone who died elsewhere, and they brought the bones to that site for whatever purpose, and they buried it there under a fire. So there was one artifact left with it. It was a stone cell kind of a thing. And that's the oldest date of a red ochre burial, radiocarbon date, yet to be found in Maine. Although we know that the red ochre burial practice had gone on for at least 8,000 years. So it's 3,000 years older than that. So these people were high-tech red ochre burials compared to what people were doing 3,000 years before. But we haven't ever found them. So they're out there somewhere, and it's going to take some fortuitous circumstance that help you figure it out. But when you think about this region, realize as the water came down, the lakes achieved different levels they stand today. As it dried out, and the ice dams broke away, and the water levels started to drop, and the land heaved up a little bit, the drainage patterns started to take their modern configuration. So places that were, a little flatter terrain between lakes, when there was at one time that way, now there's more relief between the ridges and whatnot. But to give you some idea of what it must have been like, you've all been over the Granite Hill Road toward Hollowell, right? You go over that big hill just coming down the road into Hollowell. Well, there was a lady named Mrs. Shepherd right on top of that hill that had a garden, and she was out gardening for 2 or 3 years in a row. She found this interesting little chips and flakes and stuff. She said, it doesn't look like. She kind of had an idea that it was something made by human beings, but didn't know what. So she called the state archaeologist up, and come to find out, when that material was broken up, it was a Paleo-Indian site. The water level was right up on that plateau where she is. How high is that above the current level of the Kennebec River? And if you looked out across toward Togus, what would you see? I mean, long, low ridges and a lot of water. Anyway, between that time and when we know people were traveling back and around by canoes, the water levels dropped rather quickly. And by 5,000 or 6,000 years ago, the modern current lake systems were intact. Here they were. And there were minor adjustments. I didn't know until I looked at the Maine Geological Survey website on glacial history of Maine that there was a time when Moosehead drained out over northeast and northwest Cary, down the West Branch, and the Kennebec was much smaller. The Penobscot was much bigger. And then around 8,000 years ago, the Penobscot starts getting smaller. The Kennebec starts getting bigger. Now, the Penobscot's still big, but it was not as big as it was apparently. And there's several lines of research that make that pretty fascinating to think about. Within probably a few lifetimes, people saw the level of Moosehead Lake change, where the water started running out east and west outlets, not out over northwest or northeast Cary. And then, you know, I don't think it was like, oh my God, here comes the water. But it was something that you'd have noticed when your grandfather says that when they, you know, when they came here, they did whatever. But the thing about canoeing is that there's two schools of thought. My school is, I don't know when they started canoeing. The other school of thought is not before 3,500 years ago. How do you know that? Well, before that, they were using dugout canoes. Well, how do you know that? Because they find these big gouges that must have been used to make dugout canoes. It's called, if you and I found an artifact and took it to one of these jokers, they were a group we call the Harvard Bastards. If we said that, look what I found, Doc. I think it's he said, that's right, speculation. But when they do it, and here's how the evolution of that idea, it has to be used to dugout for dugout canoes, number one. Where they did make dugout canoes, they didn't use gouges, they burned them out and chopped them out and all that. Number two, never found any dugout canoes in Maine. They do last in the mud quite a while, but they have found some, but nothing you travel in. Number three, 12-foot dugout canoe weighs 1,700 pounds. A 12-foot or 15-foot Myron Smart homemade canoe weighs 65. Quite a bit of difference. And you'd have to be one big Indian to be able to put that baby on your shoulder. It would only be a calm water craft. Because anything is, it would come over the sides, right? It's a log, it's in the water. You could waterproof. It would set a little higher, but it's still just a log. And it was a boat. I mean, it really is made to work. The thing about canoes that was fascinating to me is that with a certain effort, you can propel yourself through some pretty difficult places and see things that you don't have to drive that. You can get there now more easily going by canoe, but it was more fun to go by canoe and get to places that I used to go on trips that Myra used to go on. We guided people and all that. And he'd say, well, when we went down the West Branch and we stayed at, you know, by the boom house or wherever it was, we came back, it took us 2 days and we, you know, stopped here and we fished and so on. So I was always, when I was coming back up the river particularly, I was always saying, well, Myra, when he came by here, going upriver, it took him a day to get just a halfway house on the West Branch. So my wife and I left one morning from down by Jasuncook, and by 4 o'clock we're at Penobscot Farm on the West Branch, by Moosehead, you know, that was where the Cary, where northeast Cary comes in. At the end of it's called Penobscot Farm, but that's where northeast Cary starts to go over the lake. So anyway, we got there. So I told Myra, he said, well, how long did it take to come back up the river? I said, oh, just one day. We started at 7 and got out at 5. He goes, you done good. That's how you done good. So I knew that. I knew he'd like that. So, but he also had a lot of insight about where you would go canoeing. And when he started guiding as a 14-year-old, he guided with a group of guys that were professional guides at Rockwood. They were mostly Indians, Micmacs and Maliseets and Penobscots. And they knew, you know, they were not that far from living in the woods themselves. So they had a lot of this memory that he just picked it up. So he, as a boy, learned if you were going up to, say, the North Branch of the Penobscot River, the big bog, you might want to go up one way and come back a longer way, but it's downstream. And it's way easier to come back that way if there's plenty of water. But if you want to read more about canoeing old-fashioned style, I suggest, not my book, but I suggest you get this book. It's not good form to go to where you got books for sale and you're humping somebody else's stuff. But this is really a great book. It's called The Wabanaki Homeland of the New State of Maine. It's about a survey the governor of Maine commissioned in 1820 to send John Treat with an Indian guide, John Neptune, the John Neptune, on a canoe sojourn around the territory encompassed by the Penobscot watershed. That's a lot of canoeing. You think you're starting, down here, and you're going all the way up around here, and they thought they'd be back by maybe October. They didn't start until September. And by the time they got started, the water was too low. They got the West Branch, and the Indians up there said, "Oh, the water's too low, you can't go," and ruined your canoe. But they went anyway. And in that 500-mile trip they took, they went through 4 birch bark canoes, which they always were able to find one to buy from somebody. So he and Captain Neptune struck off. They had to contend with bad weather, low water, and by the time they got around the corner coming down, they started getting to the freezing conditions. And they only had the food they had, and I think they trapped a little bit, but the things that they just endured coming down the river, coming back, and he said, we got to Mattawamkeag, and Captain Neptune fell in through the ice. Then it said, we made camp 5 miles down the river, and spent a cold night. So that's all they'd say. He wouldn't say, geez, My God. The other thing that's awesome about this is that Neptune would be describing, Treat drew the maps. Neptune sat in the canoe and told Treat what he was looking at. And this stream here, we call it Philabook, and it goes up through several sets of rapids to a lake, and it's 6 miles. And you look at that and oh geez, there it is. And he would say, there's 5 ponds at the head of this. And you count the ponds, and there's 5. So how he stored all that in his brain, I don't know, but he did. And he could call it up. The other thing that's fascinating, I don't know if you like place names or not, native names and what they kind of like mean. I've always been kind of fascinated by that. And 3 things, they mean 1 of 3 things usually. A geographic peculiarity, means something you cannot miss but see, like my title of my book, Above the Gravel Bar. That's the that's the English translation of a word, Passanumkeag. Above the gravel bar. Well, the gravel bar is in the middle of the river, and you got to go around it. And over here is the Passanumkeag stream, but it's so small and it comes in at an angle, you might not see it. But if you go around that bar, you're going above the gravel bar, then you start paying attention. Probably, if you knew the language and you knew where you were going. Upriver 18 miles is Mattawamkeag. Kind of similar word, right? The Wamkeag part and all that. Well, Mattawamkeag means in the mouth of gravel bar. So it's the gravel bar is where the river, the Mattawamkeag runs into the Penobscot. And it's nowhere near as big as the one downriver either. So your person would have these mental cues. The other things they describe, the names offered, the availability of particular kinds of food, particularly fish. And the third thing would be the relative canoeing difficulties. And sometimes those are built into the names. We have a much better glossary of Penobscot names than we do of the Indians of the Kennebec or Androscoggin valleys, because they got all run out or killed off. Penobscots hung on a little longer. And as a result, we have quite a few words that give us an idea of this kind of a sense. First of all, I don't think Indians named rivers the Penobscot River. They named places of the river. There'd be our river. I mean, the names of all these tribes were the people of a particular place. It wasn't like, where we live here. That's where we are from. But the place names themselves were named particular places. Cobbessy Stream, for example. The name of the stream is, the ponds, the lakes, the whole deal. that probably was the name of the spot at the mouth of the Cobbessy Stream in Gardner, where they speared sturgeon by torchlight. So when somebody coming up the river, just recording this stuff, he asked some guy, well, what's that place? And the Indian, if it's an Indian, says Cobbessy. Oh, so that must be the name of the stream. So we then would name it the name of the stream, the pond, the whatever. And that's how these names got applied, or misapplied actually. But they named particular places. And you know of certain kinds of fish, for example, that they'd be seasonal. That these names would only be good for certain times of certain times of year. But I've always been interested, and there was always a place on the interstate that I've gone up over many times. Probably you have too. Mount Catan's right there. It's above Millinocket, and you come over Salmon Stream, where it comes out of Salmon Stream Lake or Rush Lake, either one. Here runs down underneath the interstate. Beautiful little rapids right there. I thought, geez, you know, I bet there was an archaeological site right here somewhere. Well, Neptune gives it a name. He calls the name of that place Umbadongkeg. And what it means is upstream, you know, for a certain distance, and ahead of the rapids, you come to a dead water. So that could be anywhere. I mean, a lot of places like that, right? And I look down the Penobscot River, and below Howland, above the Old Town, there's another place called Umbadongkeg. So it was a name that it was a descriptive of a particular thing. Now, what do you suppose? If the Penobscots had their suite of names for their region, what do you suppose the Kennebecks call them? Would it be in relation to their travel through the area? I mean, would it be in relation to where they lived? And you understand what I'm saying? That they're Indians, they know how to get there, but I don't think they had the same names, the same places. And we don't know that. I mean, all we know is what was recorded by either priests or European chroniclers who didn't know how to write a lot of the sounds even. So you get these enormous difficulty with French and English translations of the same words. It's hard to understand.
You mentioned Cobbessy, but wasn't Cobbessy Cobbessaconte? Do we know what the end of that meant?
Well, it has something to do with sturgeon, and it's a common name. Like in Bangor, there's Canduskeg Stream. That's a sturgeon stream, and there's a word in Penobscot that's kind of like Cobbessy, but it comes out Canduskeg. And there's Passagassawakeg over in Belfast. That's another sturgeon word, and passing whatever the root is, and Cobbessy have a similarity in the S sounds. So you say, yeah, that's probably it. Would be, you know, well, what else is it? You know, you have to. Well, it says on the local town history that it means moose look me gun tick means I went to shoot a moose and he missed my gun ticked and he got away. You know, well, probably not. But the names are fascinating, and the Penobscot tribe's working on bringing their language back, and they do know some of the names of these places, and strangely, they're kind of keeping them quiet. They're keeping some of that stuff to themselves, which I don't kind of blame them, really. You know, people like us are interested, but they have a different level of interest, I think, than we have. Imagine what it'd be like to paddle up one of these little streams, knowing your great-great-great-grandfather or your great-great-grandmother brought all the kids up there for the winter. They hunted whatever they hunted, moose or deer or something. But I mean, it'd be pretty powerful to have that connection as a modern person. I mean, where would I go to find that? England, I mean, or France, or probably not. I wouldn't know when I got there, so I wouldn't know the name of the place. But the canoe thing is pretty interesting, because what it means is that people that had this technology, number one, is considered the most important technological development of the prehistoric Northeast. It was the biggest thing that they did was build these canoes. Because think of what it does. It liberates you as a pedestrian from, you gotta still go to hard work and all that, but you got, how much can you carry in a canoe compared to what you would carry on your back? And when you realize, my maps, I'm sorry about the maps, but if you think of the rivers of Maine being like giant trees, they grow up from the ocean with their main trunks, and as they get to the interior, they branch in all directions. And their branches become virtually intermingled. So you can go up, perhaps up the Kennebec River to Sebastopol. Sebastopol means almost through route. Almost through to where? Penobscot. Because you go up to the head of Sebastopol stream, and it's only half a mile over into Southampton stream, which runs into Bangor across from Brewer. It's hard going in some places, but if you had an untrapped beaver population infesting these woods like they would have been, the area of canoeability would be much farther. Now, it wouldn't be the kind of canoeing you like to do with the family because they're hard. It's getting over beaver dams and around that stuff is hard going. Easier than walking through the same terrain though. And if you knock a hole in your canoe, don't worry, there's stuff right in the woods right beside you. You can go get it probably in a couple of hours and be back paddling down the river or wherever. So they're amazing in that regard. People that have become good skilled at manufacturing, repairing them, fixing them and all, say that they're pretty amazing. You get about 10 years out of them, birch bark canoe. So you wouldn't have to have one every single year. You might want to have one in the head of the lake and one so you can come into it. Or maybe that's where you might have a dugout in a place like that. They found 2 dugouts in Shelburne Pond, Vermont. The radiocarbon dates are there about 3,000 years old, and they are the crudest looking things. They're about the size of a good sized stick of pulp. And you'd have to have your hair parted right in the middle. And I don't know how you'd get, they'd only be useful in going out to pull nets near an outlet, or I don't know what else. But they'd be so like this, they're not big enough to really be able to move around it. The small man could probably manage it, but it'd be hard going. You'd be, be probably a good chance of getting wet. Now, canoes always kind of get the bad rap about, they're pretty dangerous. They're so damn tippy, and they don't tip over. You fall out of them. It's not that they're so treacherous. It's that your balance ain't that great, right? And for a lot of people, pulling is hard because they can't stand up. You know how you get a little car sick. Sometimes you try to read the car, too much going on, right? Some people have the same experience when they stand up and they try to pull, because you give a shove this way, your canoe's moving, but the bottom of the river is moving too, and the current's moving at the same time. So you got all these 3 things. Then whenever you can see it, and some of you say, I get so dizzy, I can't do that. I never got dizzy doing it. So that was one thing, but a number of people have complained about that. Maybe they didn't want to do it that bad in the first place. I don't know. Because it is, you wonder why the hell am I doing this anyway? But it was easy to learn, and you just get better and better and better at it. So now I don't know where I am on the scale of good, but I could get around. And I got hurt a couple of years ago, and I can't get around quite like I did. So my days of picking my canoe up and going with it are gone. But I've got the memories, and I still got some archaeological stuff. I hope to get around to some of these sites a little bit more in the future. I'm not going to make any great discoveries. I just go look at the stuff and visit different places that were important. When I was a boy, I didn't know that the Spec River right in front of me, where it ran right by my house, We used to wade across the river to go to baseball practice in the summertime. Was part of a major canoe connection between Old Town and Quebec. It was called the Piscataquis-Awongan. And the word Wongan is not unknown around here. But the word Wongan can mean like a canoe. It can mean, you've heard the phrase, I put all my Wongan in the back of the pickup, took it to wherever, camp. Wongan can mean that which is carried on the back, the canoe, camping stuff, in other words. So when you have a name like Piscataquis-Awongan, you know that it has to do with the Piscataquis River, the watershed, but it's also a carry to someplace. Well, this was from the Penobscot watershed up to Kennebec and Moosehead, that way. And there's many ways to get to Moosehead from anywhere in the state of Maine. The Cocktawagan stream right down here is one of those Wagon names. And I saw a name, the best definition I've got for it was it means closed up route. Because Johnson Pond in Savannah's is right over the ridge on the other side. And once again, with an untrapped beaver population, the falls you find coming into the stream in Athabasca would give way to a dammable, or I might say damnable stretch of water where you can actually put your canoe back in and paddle for a little ways. But it's not very far over there. And if you were skilled in all what you need to be skilled at and toughened into that way of life, carrying your canoe 2 or 3 miles would just be what you do. It wouldn't mean, well, I gotta go to Augusta today, I'll be back, you know, it'd be one of those kind of chore kind of things, probably. I mean, but that's what you gotta do if you want to go where you want to go. And imagine that if this involved the whole families and probably 1 or 2 dogs. And sometimes we let the dogs kind of swim and run along the banks and catch up if they did. If they didn't, well, someone's got a nice dog. The other thing I found fascinating about canoeability or difficulty of canoeing, you ever notice there's a lot of words that end in keg and cook, Sebastopol, Cook, Matawan, keg. Supposedly now, according to Fanny Hardy Storm and some other philologists, so that's what you call word people, the word cook and keg mean place where, and the sound of keg or cook indicate the sound of a pole on rocky bottom, clicking. Easy code. It's easy canoeing. The sounds that end with or have the suffix or the part of the word hunk sound, Saudi hunk, Nabadunky hunk. If you go canoeing there, you'll know why they call it where the unk part comes from, because it means you've got to get out and you've got to carry your canoe through some, you know, either uphill or some difficult terrain. So just by knowing the names, you'd have some idea of the difficulty you would encounter. So that would be another way you would know where you were, because they didn't have maps, and they probably could do pretty good at the directions from looking at the sun and the stars and all, and the lay of the land. Rivers only go in one direction, usually in most places, most watersheds. But the great thing about Maine, and this is what makes the canoe thing so important in prehistory, was the major rivers go this way, the branches all kind of meet. So Combahee intermingles our immediate west with the Androscoggin. So you wouldn't have to go down around the ocean to get up. You could just go through the woods and be there in way less time. You can go further up and you would connect over with the Kennebec from ponds up around Mount Vernon. Now there'd be some carrier to carry you over, but nonetheless it would still be it would be doable. Now, when you see these big fields with a stream running through the middle and maybe a little kind of a brushy, sort of a rough going along the back with the alders and the stuff growing up. Just imagine what that would look like if that were a forest and there were beaver every 200 or 300 yards going back up into the woods. You'd have a set of stairs you could follow you're gonna get your feet wet, but you could pursue that and stay in pretty decent conditions. Now, as soon as Europeans developed or had the Indians do enough trapping to develop a market for beaver pelts, they were gone in a fairly short amount of time. And it's hard to imagine how many there were, but one estimate is that during colonial times, at the beginning of the colonial period, when they started to trap them up there for the Kennebec River market in Fort Western, there probably were 35,000 beaver living in the bogs just west of the river, below, around the Jackman area, that whole area, just that's one area. And today, there's an interesting project being pursued out west to bring beaver back to the desert west. Because when you look at the rock art on the walls, or the lore of the people who live there, they have beaver traditions. And the desertification has been largely accelerated by the cattle industry and modern big time farming. And when you take, 6 inches of topsoil and you plow it over and over and over again, so you're down to, I don't know how much left, not much. I mean, you got a problem. And that's what they're facing. So they're trying to convince ranchers and farmers to bring the beaver back and not shoot them and keep the damn cattle out of the streams and let the cattle graze around, but don't keep them out of the green stuff that the beaver need. And they've got the book I read is called Eager, a history of the strange and interesting history of the beaver and why they matter. And this guy's kind of pushed it a little bit, but he says that's the answer to the dry west, is to bring the beaver back and raise the water table back in the areas where they inhabited. Take a while, but where they recreated some of these beaver habitats, the before and after pictures are staggering. I mean, what is just a little stream going up into looks like the desert. 10 years later, it's got all kinds of stuff going on. It's like a regular place in the woods, basically. So there's hope, but maybe the birch bark canoe will come back and make us all healthier and more in tune with the natural world, and the damn beaver will help us understand why. But when you paddle up the river, and I'll let you go with this, there's always some interesting things that give you pause for thought. A few years ago, I was paddling up the Piscataquis one afternoon. It was kind of a nice day, and I just paddled along. I look up and I see a deer standing right at where the river turns a little bit. I said, "Oh, there's a deer standing right there." So I'm standing there, and then there's an eagle right there in the tree. There's a deer and an eagle. I said, "That's pretty cool." So I'm standing there paddling. I stand up and paddle a lot. Got a big long paddle. And this beaver swims out the other side of the river. It comes right across like a torpedo, gets right out to me, probably, maybe 25, 30 feet away. And I'm paddling like that. I look at him, and he, like that, slams his tail in the water, and he's gone. The damn deer runs off, and the eagle flies away. And I said, "Geez, I never heard any of you. I'm a harmless hunter. I mean, why do you all hate me?" Well, they don't particularize. They just don't like any of us, I guess. So, we got some work to do. But anyway, I hope the next time you think about canoe, I know that a lot of you have been in canoes and you've gone on canoe trips and all that, so you've probably thought about this stuff. But remember, when you look out from the canoe and you look, where's the outlet? Well, you can see it pretty much. It tells you where it is just by following the horizon. Like, you can be fooled a little bit, but nonetheless, that's what you aren't going fast enough. You're not going to go roaring by it and have to turn around 10 miles down the road because the traffic's too heavy. You can turn around and say, "Oh, no problem." Way better than I-295 or whatever. Now, if you got any questions, I'll be glad to try to answer. If I don't know the answer, I'll make it up, probably. And hope you had a good time. And worthwhile time. The book that I wrote appeared like this in 1985, and then it stayed like this for a few years. And then this company in Massachusetts wanted to republish it. So I said, all right. So they I put a really nice cover. My wife took that picture. That's Combahee Stream. And me pulling my canoe up under the rapids there. And she took that picture. Anyway, they printed 1,000 of these. And I got one. And I called up the company about 2 months later. No one answered the phone. Couldn't get anybody. What I found out was that the company went broke right after they printed these things. And I don't think it was because of this, it was they were already in thin ice. It was just, that was just, so the last I knew, the salesman called me and said, tell me, this is what I feel bad about you getting hung up with these people, but here's what happened. They went broke, and the people that bought the company out was gonna throw away 1,000 of these. And I thought, well, you might as well accept the cover, because this is the kind of company this guy ran. You get a galley proof before you see the final thing, right? You go through corrective. So yeah, I did that. And I think it's in page 57. I don't even want to look at it anymore. I'm so sick of it. I wrote in the thing, correct this note, and refer to page 57, so on and so forth, like that. I get this one, and you page through it, and there it is. Correct this note. They just put it right in. That's what, who did the chimp doing the what? They had one right in, but I mean, they got some better kind of ink doing the checking on things. But anyway, I really liked the picture. The picture was beautiful, but you know, the rest of it. And this is the current one. I brought the pump my self-esteem up. They come out in also a hardback now, so I've gone to the hardcover genre. So, this is the thing right here. Well, I had a lot of fun doing it, and if you have any fun reading it, let me know. I'll be glad to help you understand it a little bit better if you want to, or if you don't, just it's close enough to Christmas, give it to someone. Yeah, right? If you have to buy one. So, any questions?
You mentioned page 57 on page 58.
What's that?
So you mentioned page 57 on page 58. You talk about the Androscoggin Lake up over to Wilson, and then onwards to Garden.
Yeah.
Have you ever done it? Have you ever gone over that ridge in between Androscoggin Lake and Wilson,
Yeah.
and then down Wilson Stream to Annabesco?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't know how much higher the water level lake in that pond is now than it was.
But Androscoggin Lake doesn't have a dam. It has a dam that it's
Right.
on the dead.
Right. That's right.
So
So
it's one of the natural lakes, and it actually has a delta, which is highly unusual in it, because the water flows back.
right.
One of the
That's
things
right.
that
Yeah.
goes back
Yeah.
and forth.
Yeah.
Because of the Androscoggin River. But
But-
I've looked at it from a topo point of view, as far in understanding that they didn't just walk willy-nilly, as you point out, they walk single file. And they don't go out of their way to like move stuff. They walk around stuff. So they're
Yeah.
not necessarily going the exact same spot each time.
Right. That's right.
So my question though is, had you ever tried, because I looked on the topo map and it seems to be a natural course to go up and over that, because there's a stream that comes out of the ground on the east side,
Yeah.
not the west side.
Well, you can do that. Yeah. I'm sure people have done that, and there may be reasons why some people would choose to walk around, carry around that way, different levels of water or whatever. But I do know that Annabescook is pretty close to the level of these lakes in Winthrop, and in 1823, Andrew W. Tinkham tells us that one of the Berries and one of the Freeman Dexter, brought over a tub full of pickerel from Annabescook and dumped it into Combahee, or into Annabescook. And within a short time, they were everywhere in the watershed. And I don't know if that's true or not, but
Well, pickerel are native to the east side of the Penobscot. They
yeah,
were brought from the east side of the Penobscot to the west side. And interestingly enough, the redfin pickerel was just put on the endangered list recently. You
yeah.
can't fish for them now.
Yeah. Anybody ever see that, read that book called Polluted Paradise by named Pollard, right?
Yes, Pollard, it was done in the early sixties.
What was it she said about Combahee Stream in the 1840s? And three guys caught 12,500 pounds of sturgeon in 4 nights.
Yeah, I
It
believe.
was in the 1700s.
It was 50 fish, I think it was, or something like that. So it was like, I don't know how many fish that was, but
Last spring, the sturgeon came into Cobbessy Stream to spawn, and there
Yeah.
were probably 1,000 of them between the bridge in Gardner, the big bridge, the
yeah,
new one,
yeah,
and the main stem Kennebec.
yeah,
You could have taken an awful lot of fish right there.
right, yeah. And, just imagine what, if that were true of all these other places. And how many, up in Sebastopol Lake in, Newport, they found a 5,000-year-old fish weir at the inflow of tributary that comes in. They pulled some stakes and they analyzed them, got radiocarbon dates off the stakes. Over 5,000 is the earliest, going down to about 500 years ago is the youngest. The earliest were cut with a type of axe that we know they had at that time. That was the kind of like beaver chopping. You go around the thing like this, so you leave a distinctive pencil kind of a sharpening effect on your stake. And they drove the butt ends into the mud and then held them in with logs or rocks or whatever. But the more modern ones were cut with an axe, a stone axe cut this way, and the heads were stuck in, not the butts. So they did find on the bottom there a piece of laced birch bark. That's kind of like an old piece of birch bark, but they don't know what it was. Was it a basket? Was it part of the weir complex? But my point is, if they had one of those at that pond, how many would you see on these other ponds all around? If you had people living, and there must have been conventions about if I travel through your hunting or fishing territory and I come to your weir, I may get caught a fish or two out of it, but I'm not going to tear it up and ruin it because I've got one too. So you'd have this mutual vulnerability, I suppose. And I don't know if people weren't like that. I don't know. I don't think they're any better people than we are. But I'm just thinking that when you live that kind of life and you know how important all your little angles that you have on survival work, you might be kind of leery about screwing someone else's stuff up when they could come do the same thing to you if they could figure out who did it or whatever. But you wonder about stuff like that, and you say, well, the smartest they are in Newport, if people were doing it up there, they were doing it everywhere else they could do it, and they would know where. Some of the techniques for taking eels were pretty interesting. Penobscot Man by Speck, he described the technique of using powdered root of it's a springtime shrub along the riverbanks. You can pound it into a powder, and then when the eels run in the fall, you throw it in the water and stir the water up, and it has a narcotic effect on the fish when they run out. And you can gather them by the ton apparently, and stand on the shore with long sticks and throw them up on the bank, and kids would gather them and cut them open and drape them over a smoking rack. And I think if you had 50, 60 people doing that, maybe they didn't all live together all the time, but periodically came together to do that sort of thing. You probably produce quite a bit of stuff for the wintertime. And I guess the eel, you take the backbone out and smoke it. Then all you gotta do to get it to be edible is just chew it if you want to, but also just put it in water, hot water, and boil it, it swells back up and tastes great, I guess. I never had done it, but just imagine. An eel's all meat though, isn't it? So I mean, as far if you weren't the scruples of the eel eating, I don't think any worse than eating a trout, probably.
It was good, the one out of the Hudson River that I caught.
Right, yeah. But anyway,
You see eel weirs somewhere in the rivers still. Triangular downstream V's where the fish would be channeled into a area where they would go into a box and be trapped and then be taken out by however. We used to have one in front of my house on the Speck River. And every once in a while you go down there and you'd smell this overwhelming fishy smell. And where they'd gone around the rapids of low water, you had a hard time standing up because they're so slippery. Yeah. And we asked Myron about that. He said, that's the eel detour. He knew all about it, yeah. But a lot of things like that, they're just pretty fascinating.
Hmm.
And they're still around if you know where to look. I mean, you haven't got to go that far either. It's hopefully. We'll see more people doing things like this in the future, and there's big demand for it, and, you know. I just hope that I got mixed feelings about that big mine around the Moosehead Lake region and all that. As far as all these other values are concerned, so big thing. So. Anyway, any more questions? Thank you all for coming.
Yeah.
And don't forget, right? Go get sweatshirts over there.